Today, a single, narrow waterway between Africa and Asia handles 12% of all global trade, processing over $1 trillion in goods annually. It is a choke point so vital that its closure, even for 6 days in 2021, by a single grounded container ship, sent economic shockwaves across every continent. The world watched, transfixed, as supply chains buckled and billions of dollars evaporated. This profound vulnerability, the power of a single canal to bring global commerce to its knees, was first brutally exposed nearly 7 decades ago. In 1956, a fierce geopolitical struggle erupted over this waterway, a confrontation that reshaped the world order itself. This is the story of the Suez Crisis and how that power was first tested. Constructed over a decade by French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps, the Suez Canal opened in 1869, immediately transforming global maritime trade. It offered a crucial shortcut, linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean, bypassing the arduous, months-long journey around the Cape of Good Hope. For the British Empire, the canal became an indispensable artery, its lifeline to India, its jewel in the crown, and its vast colonial holdings in Asia. Control of the Suez was paramount to British strategic interests and economic prosperity for nearly a century. But by the mid-20th century, the geopolitical landscape was shifting dramatically. The old colonial empires of Britain and France were waning, while new independent nations emerged, fueled by a rising tide of nationalism. In Egypt, a charismatic and ambitious leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, seized power in 1952. Nasser envisioned a strong, independent Egypt, leading a pan-Arab movement that would shake off the last vestiges of foreign influence. His grand project was the Aswan High Dam, a monumental infrastructure initiative designed to modernize Egypt's economy and improve its people's lives. Initially, the United States and Britain offered to fund this colossal undertaking, pledging $70 million and $14 million respectively. But their support came with strings attached. As Nasser increasingly flirted with the Soviet bloc, buying arms from Czechoslovakia and recognizing communist China, Washington grew wary. In July 1956, U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles abruptly withdrew the American offer, with Britain following suit. This was a direct rebuke, an attempt to pressure Nasser. But Nasser, ever the nationalist, would not be dictated to. His response would ignite a crisis that threatened to engulf the world. Nasser's defiant answer came on July 26, 1956. In a nationally televised speech, he announced the immediate nationalization of the Suez Canal Company, declaring that its revenues, estimated at $25 million annually, would now fund the Aswan Dam. For Britain and France, who still owned 44% of the company's shares and saw the canal as their vital strategic interest, this was an act of economic warfare, an intolerable challenge to their global prestige and access to Middle Eastern oil. Prime Minister Anthony Eden of Britain believed Nasser was a new Hitler, a threat that must be confronted. The stage was set for confrontation. Behind closed doors, a desperate plan began to form. Britain and France, unable to openly wage war without international condemnation, sought a pretext. They found it in Israel. For years, Israel had faced Egyptian blockades in the Gulf of Aqaba and incursions along its Gaza border. An alliance of convenience quickly materialized. In October 1956, British, French, and Israeli representatives met in secret at Sevres, France, crafting a clandestine protocol. The plan was audacious. Israel would invade the Sinai Peninsula, pushing towards the canal. Britain and France would then issue an ultimatum to both Egypt and Israel, demanding a ceasefire and a withdrawal of forces from a 10-mile zone on either side of the canal. If Nasser refused, which they knew he would, Anglo-French forces would intervene as peacekeepers to protect the vital waterway and its shipping, effectively reoccupying the canal zone. The invasion began on October 29, 1956, as Israeli tanks rolled into the Sinai. The next day, Britain and France issued their ultimatum. Nasser, predictably, rejected it outright. On October 31, British and French warplanes bombed Egyptian airfields and targets, followed by paratrooper drops on November 5. Militarily, the operation was a swift success. Egyptian forces were outmatched, and the Canal zone was quickly secured. Britain and France believed they had achieved their objective, a decisive reassertion of their power and control over the Suez. But they had profoundly misjudged the new global order. The real shock came not from Nasser's resistance, but from Washington and Moscow. U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower was absolutely furious. His British and French allies had acted unilaterally, without consulting the United States, and had plunged the Middle East into chaos on the eve of a U.S. presidential election. More critically, their colonial-era aggression threatened to push Arab nations squarely into the Soviet orbit, severely undermining American Cold War strategy. Eisenhower's administration launched a devastating counterattack, not with weapons, but with economic power. The U.S. threatened to sell off its large holdings of British sterling bonds, a move that would have catastrophically collapsed the British pound. Washington also imposed an oil embargo on Britain and France, strangling their economies. At the same time, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev issued thinly veiled nuclear threats against London, Paris, and Tel Aviv, promising to send volunteers to support Egypt. Caught between the hammer of American financial might and the anvil of Soviet nuclear threats, Britain and France had no choice but to back down. This was the pivot. The old colonial powers, for centuries the arbiters of global power, were revealed as utterly dependent on American goodwill. Their independent military adventure collapsed under the weight of superpower pressure, demonstrating an unprecedented shift in global authority. The humiliating retreat began almost immediately. Under immense international pressure, British and French forces withdrew from Egypt by December 1956. Israeli forces followed suit by March 1957. Anthony Eden, the British Prime Minister, resigned in disgrace, his political career shattered. The crisis was a devastating blow to Anglo-French prestige and marked the undeniable end of their colonial era. Egypt under Nasser maintained control of the Suez Canal, its nationalization firmly established. The United Nations deployed its first-ever peacekeeping force, the UN Emergency Force, UNEF, to the Sinai, setting a precedent for future international interventions. The Suez Crisis didn't just decide the fate of a canal. It accelerated the decline of traditional European powers and firmly cemented the United States and the Soviet Union as the world's undisputed superpowers. The canal remained a crucial, yet vulnerable, artery. Its subsequent closure for 8 years during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, and more recently the Ever Given incident in 2021, continued to underscore its strategic fragility. The crisis taught the world a harsh lesson about interdependence and the profound economic consequences of disrupting global shipping lanes. The Suez Canal, a 193-kilometer ribbon of water, remains as geopolitically vital today as it was in 1956. The crisis revealed that this waterway was not merely an economic asset. It was a fulcrum of global power, capable of sparking international conflict and redefining alliances. The events of 1956 didn't just alter ownership of a canal. They dramatically redrew the map of global power, ending an old world and ushering in a new, more interconnected and dangerously interdependent one. The control of this narrow strip of water still holds immense geopolitical weight.